Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new commentary. This time for Sonic the Hedgehog, which I actually have a pretty decent history with as a series, but kind of ashamed to talk about it sometimes because there are some reprehensible individuals in the Sonic the Hedgehog fan community. So thankfully I don't consider myself part of that fan base, but I played a lot of Sonic the Hedgehog video games in my time, and let me tell you, I usually play the good ones. That's not to say that I haven't had my run-in with some stinkers. This right here though, this is the original Sonic the Hedgehog 1991 game. No, just because there was a game with the same name released in the year 2006, that is not the same game, and that is why that game is usually referred to as Sonic 06. But people don't refer to this game as Sonic 91 because that's just dumb. This is Sonic the Hedgehog. The other one is Sonic 06. Although technically, yes, both of these games are called Sonic the Hedgehog. Arguing semantics still. So what is the goal of the Sonic the Hedgehog, right? Well, certain people might try to look into it a lot more deeply than they should, but all you're really doing is running fast through levels, rescuing animals from the tyranny of a fat man, usually riding around in a vehicle by the name of Dr. Ivo Eggman Robotnik. Now, there's a little bit of the naming confusion between the regions, you see. Early on, and actually I kind of resonate more with the earlier name here in America as well. When I was growing up, I barely played the games, but I did watch the first two cartoon series, which was called, The Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, I think the first one's called, and the other one, I can't remember exactly, but I know the other one is usually referred to as SATAM, S-A-T-A-M, Sonic in the AM. I guess the other one might have just been called Sonic the Hedgehog, the animated series. I don't know. But that one was the one with Sally Acorn and all those other furry characters. I'm not going to say much more than that. I don't want to get people's imagination stirred up. Alright? Now, the Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog I remember a bit more because it was a lot more wild and frantic, which is probably more fitting of what Sonic is when you really think about it. Again, depending on who you ask. But, yeah, a lot of my early childhood with Sonic really does kind of go back to that. But try not to go too off topic here. Let's try and go back to talk about this game itself because this is not going to be a very long commentary. It's going to be a one and done too because I managed to do this new playthrough where I managed to beat the game in under an hour. With a little bit of editing and cutting here and there, but even with all that, this still is not a very long game. And I'm going for all 6 Chaos Emeralds too. I know some of you who play the later Sonic games are probably thinking, wait, aren't there 7 Chaos Emeralds? But remember, this is the first Sonic the Hedgehog game. Sega haven't quite figured out how many Chaos Emeralds they want in their Sonic the Hedgehog video games. I think there are even some handheld games or maybe some more of their obscure Sonic games that actually have even less than 6. I can't remember any of them off the top of my head and I couldn't tell you, but I just get this feeling maybe there's a Sonic game that has like 5 emeralds or less. I don't know. And it's probably not a very good Sonic game, mind you. Or maybe it's a spin-off. I don't know. So, we're in Green Hill Zone. I'm sorry I'm waiting until the 3rd act to tell you this. This is a rather iconic location in the series. One that gets brought up a lot, more so in the later series, actually. I would say prior to maybe Sonic Generations, which came out in 2011, so, not that long ago, even as of the recording of this commentary. Only about 9 years, just shy of a decade. Doesn't feel that long when you get to be my age. But at any rate, prior to Sonic Generations, I don't really recall Green Hill being spammed all that much. Although it is a secret unlockable in Sonic Adventure 2. Not sure if it's the Dreamcast version that has it, or if it's just the GameCube version, Sonic Adventure 2 Battle. One of those, or both of those possibly, you unlock Green Hill Zone, a 3D recreation of Green Hill Zone, specifically Act 1. And other than that, I mean, not really elsewhere. You had locations that were based on Green Hill Zone, or referencing it, surely, or inspired is probably a more apt word to say there, but it's not really Green Hill directly. And then they brought it back in Generations, and then ever since Generations, people have been arguing that Sega is spamming Green Hill too much. And to be fair, when they released Sonic Generations, they actually released two distinct versions of that game. There was the game on 3DS, and then there's the game that's on everything else, which was home consoles and PC. The 3DS version is distinct with its level choices, and even though they could have gone with a different level for Sonic the Hedgehog 1's representation specifically, they just used Green Hill again. So, already there's an issue, and there's not even another game, it's a different version of the same game, really. And then they bring it back in Sonic Mania and Sonic Forces, which I can understand it for Sonic Mania since that's meant to be another anniversary sort of game like Generations. But Forces, Sonic Forces, I haven't actually beat that game yet as of recording this, but it's on my backlog. At any rate, Sonic, from what I know of Sonic Forces, it's meant to be a whole new game to complement the mostly nostalgia poundering of Sonic Mania, which makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Yet, they still brought back Green Hill Zone anyway, and they brought back classic Sonic from Sonic Generations. So, I don't know, it's kind of a whole mashuggan of a mess, if you ask me. But thankfully, I don't try to pay too much stock into what Sega does with their Sonic the Hedgehog games. Speaking from a mostly casual perspective, yeah, they can be pretty weird with Sonic the Hedgehog sometimes. And I know I'm spending a lot of time not really talking much about the original Sonic the Hedgehog, but there really isn't much to say, which is why I'm mostly just taking this opportunity to talk about other Sonic the Hedgehog games in the series too. I mean, why not, right? You come on here, you're looking up a Let's Play or whatever of Sonic the Hedgehog. You really gonna expect someone to only talk about this game for the hour that it takes? I mean, I'm telling you, you just run fast, and to be fair, oh, that reminds me. This is the original Sonic the Hedgehog. There is no spin dash. It's one of Sonic's most iconic moves. You can't do the spin dash in Sonic the Hedgehog 1. Well, the original version of Sonic the Hedgehog, it is worth mentioning, and it would probably be more appropriate to bring this up later on, where the differences between this version and that version would be a lot more noticeable. But I guess this is the second best time to bring it up. By the way, welcome to Marble Zone. Depending on who you ask, this is probably going to be their least favorite set of stages, or the second least favorite. Maybe even third least favorite. Depending, because I don't know. This might just be a hot take. And I'm saying this because I literally just finished replaying this game as I'm doing this, so my perspective on this is very fresh. The level design in the original Sonic the Hedgehog, sometimes it can be okay. Sometimes, though, it can be really, for lack of a better word, I'm going to say dubious. Now, there is a certain subset of Sonic games, mostly made by the developer Dimps. One common complaint that people have with those games, mostly their earlier Sonic games rather than the later ones, is that they rely on an abundance of bottomless pits to get across a difficulty of some sort, I guess you could say. Or that there's too many bottomless pits. Which honestly I do kind of find to be a weird complaint, like, and that's the only time I think I've ever heard of anybody complaining about a game having too many bottomless pits. Which, to be fair, I do find that complaint to be at least kind of on point, because whenever I go back to, I'm going to name one particular example, Sonic Advance 2. Not even the original Sonic Advance, Sonic Advance 2. Halfway through the game, starting with, funny enough, the level that takes place in the sky, I think the level is even called Sky Canyon. That is when the bottomless pits really start becoming abundant. Now, it is worth mentioning that the original Sonic the Hedgehog actually doesn't have that many bottomless pits at all. Yeah, not a lot of bottomless pits to speak of, really, thankfully. I mean, God, could you imagine? That's not to say that this game's level design isn't, it can be a bit off at times. I will not deny this. Marble Zone, I feel, is a pretty, objectively, is a bad set of levels. Not, you know, totally unbearable. It can be if you're playing a different version. We actually have plenty of time to talk about that version later on here. We've still got about 40 minutes or so. But yeah, I not to change topics too much here, but I do want to talk about the special stages of Sonic the Hedgehog, the original here. Since, after I get this, there's only going to be like a couple of them left. I'm going to say this, these are not good. Because the way you control yourself, you could probably even feel some of the pain that I feel, or I felt, when I was doing these, just by looking at my movement. You can tell that the physics are just really out of whack, and sometimes can be a little inconsistent. At least that's how it feels to me. Not just with the special stages, but a couple of later elements too. But mostly the special stages, let me tell you. I don't really know what the consensus is as to what people think is the worst special stage type in the Sonic series. But if this kind isn't at least in the top 3 worst, I don't know what you're smoking. Because, yeah, these are pretty bad. One thing, if you are sensitive to flashing lights and all that other stuff, by the way, that is something I always keep in mind with my videos, is that there's this mutually beneficial arrangement that I can do, where if I'm recording a game and I know it's going to be really flashy or really bright, what I can do when I'm editing the video is I can manually set the brightness and the contrast down by a certain percent. Usually I think it's about 3%. And this not only makes it less of a strain for people that are vulnerable to seizures, it also saves a little bit of data space on my hard drive, so win-win for everybody. So I do make a big deal about that because it's something that benefits me and other people. Other people and me. Really got to work on that. And that's my advice to all of you out there, to make yourselves look a little less narcissistic. Because I have been accused of being narcissistic in the past. Let me tell you, that is something I definitely aspired not to be. But anyways, yeah, Marble Zone is pretty slow. It's just bad. This set of level is just bad. That's the funny thing about the original Sonic, though, is like, Green Hill is a solid set of levels. I don't really have any complaints in particular. I guess it's a little too simplistic, but it's a pretty solid set of levels, I'm not gonna lie. Having the spin dash should make it better, but you know. Then you go to Marble Zone, it's bad. The next zone isn't as bad as Marble Zone, but it's not as easy on the player as Green Hill, but it's definitely an improvement. So it would be like going up and down, and then up. If you want to know about the set of levels that comes after the next one, though, you're going to have to wait till we get there, because I've got a mouthful to say about that. Me and probably everybody else who's played the original Sonic the Hedgehog, so that is to be fair. But what do I think of Sonic as a character? Let me tell you, Sonic is actually my favorite Sonic character in the series, and this has always been true from the jump. My first real experience with the Sonic the Hedgehog series was Sonic Adventure, which is a really great way to get across the personalities of most, if not all, of the characters that Sega created at the time. They even created a couple new ones, but that's besides the point. But established characters like Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and all that, you really get a better feel for their personality. Starting with the original Sonic Adventure. Maybe that's when the whole extreme Sonic fandom really started to become cultivated, because I'm pretty sure before then, the Sonic fan base was probably mostly chill. I'm making this assumption because there's not much of a reading between the lines you get otherwise. If that makes any sense at all. I'm going to be going on a lot of weird tangents if I'm ever going to do any other Sonic the Hedgehog themed commentaries going forward, let me tell you. Also, I usually do these live. I would like to have done this live because I just feel like that's better for me than having to do this in post, but let me tell you, this game, it's not easy. I mean, and it's difficult in mostly the wrong ways. I think I've already touched on this earlier, but the level design can be dubious, even in some of the least painful levels, like Spring Yard. Okay, actually, Spring Yard Zone is worse than Green Hill in terms of the difficulty, but it's a little bit less annoying than Marble Zone for sure. A lot more bouncy too. I can definitely respect that. And also, you'll notice that there's a bunch of flashing letters that spell out the word cope. So, I didn't remember that. So when I was replaying this game, I saw that. And since I usually do these older games off of an emulator, I assumed that I downloaded a hacked ROM for a split second. And then, I started thinking about, but then why would someone ROM hack the word cope and then not do anything else to the ROM? There was a split second towards the end of the game where I thought maybe someone hacked in the word cope, and they also made this game a lot more difficult than I remembered it being. But no, this game is more difficult than I remember it being. So, dealing all that stuff. But I would say that the original Sonic is not that hard. It's going to be harder than what most people that play Sonic the Hedgehog games, especially the newer ones. It's going to be a lot harder than what you guys are accustomed to. And I don't really care much for it myself, because honestly, I don't play Sonic the Hedgehog games to be challenged. At least not challenged in this type of way. Challenged to do things as fast as possible in a time trial setting. Oh yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense for Sonic, but if you just want to breeze through the game to get from beginning to end, it really shouldn't be that difficult. But let me tell you, it's a blessing that I did this, on an emulator with save states, and that is why I would never be able to do a competent playthrough, 100% playthrough of this game anyway, without save states, because the special stages are a pain in the ass. I'm telling you this. They probably look easier than they are, but they probably do still look pretty difficult depending on who you are. I mean, to be fair, I guess it's not a lot of flashing lights per se, but the whole background moving and, these special stages are still pretty bright, so I think it's a safe assumption that people might be sensitive to this sort of thing. If nothing else, it might make you go dizzy after a while if you're not careful. So, yeah, I know. But thankfully, because there's only 6 Chaos Emeralds in the game, this means that if you get all of the special stages ASAP, you'll have everything done by the end of Spring Yard Zone. And spoiler alert, there's only 6 zones in the game. So you can get all of the Chaos Emeralds at roughly what would usually be the halfway point of an any percent playthrough. And now you might be thinking, well, how much time does getting all of these Chaos Emeralds really have? I'm going to say, assuming you get these Chaos Emeralds on the first try, which is statistically unlikely, let me tell you this, because of the way they work and the way they operate. It is statistically unlikely that you're going to get all of the Chaos Emeralds on the first try. Well, it's a good thing you'll still have at least, I want to say, 5 or 6 more chances after Spring Yard Zone, since every zone in this game has 3 acts, but the 3rd act is a boss act, where you fight Robotnik at the end of it. Yes, I said Robotnik because this is a classic era Sonic game. And during this time here in the Americas, I think maybe even in Canada too, since, they're basically neighbors to us. So, us Americans and the Canadians, we compare a lot of notes. We'll put it that way, okay? Yeah. But anyway, yeah, I'm just gonna call him Robotnik for now, but hypothetically, if I were to start moving on to a later era of Sonic where calling him Eggman would be a lot more appropriate, then I might reconsider. But for now, you're just gonna have to deal with the Robotnik. And yes, that meme with the Pingus thing, by the way, that's just taking an excerpt of a line where he says snooping as usual, which is still funny in of itself out of context, and let me tell you, I do find that is actually, unironically, one of the funnier internet memes I've ever seen. I guess it helps that I was also severely familiar with the source material. Yeah, that always helps. But, at any rate, Spring Yard Zone, thoughts on this? It's alright. It's just alright. I do think that there are other levels in Sonic the Hedgehog that are less of a pain to deal with. But then again, there are also levels that are more of a pain to deal with. Like Marble Zone. And the zone that immediately comes after this. By the way, you've probably noticed a lot of weird cuts here and there. Yeah, this was one of those situations. I'll leave these in for now just because they're kind of funny. Like, now you can tell that I'm doing this with save states, because if I didn't have save states, it would be a pain to hold on to 50 rings to unlock the special stages, because, oh yeah, the special stages do not unlock unless you have 50 rings by the time you get to the end of the level. So, that's a godsend to the save states. So you have to get 50 rings to get to the special stages to get a chance. And if you mess up that chance, if you're not an emulator with save states, you're gonna have to wait till another level. You only get 2 chances out of every 3 acts. As far as I know anyway, I've never heard or seen of any instance of a special stage ring showing up after you fight Robotnik. That's just not gonna happen. At least I don't think so. So, But, yeah. Actually, I think this is the 6th one right here. This is surprisingly probably the easiest one, because you spawn practically right next to it. And then I think the one before this, or maybe the 4th one, could be obnoxiously difficult. I'd argue even the first special stage could be pretty tricky, considering it's the first one. So, And then just says Sonic got them all. Sonic's got a lot of problems, but having 6 Chaos Emeralds isn't the problem, apparently. Or however that expression goes. So thankfully, this would be part of the 100% playthrough, where it actually just becomes the any percent playthrough. Because, Now, you might be wondering, what do you get for going through the trouble of getting all 6 Chaos Emeralds? Because it is worth noting, actually, that the concept of Super Sonic was not invented until Sonic the Hedgehog 2, a year later. By the way, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 is a much more interesting, a much more engaging, a much more fun, okay, I think you get the point after all of that praising all in a row. I don't know if I'm going to be doing a commentary of that. I feel like doing a commentary of the original Sonic the Hedgehog is kind of obligatory, but if I was to do any more, I don't know. I will say, if I do another one, Sonic 2 is a very good candidate. That is a very, very... Honestly, setting aside my bias for the 3D Sonic games, because, Sonic Adventure was like the first real dive into the series, and honestly, I still consider the first two adventure games to be my favorite Sonic games. And I do admit some of it is nostalgia based, but I don't know, I can still revisit those games and have a pretty fun time. as long as I skip the cutscenes for the most part, unless I was recording the playthrough for YouTube for other people to enjoy, because a lot of people, if they're watching your playthrough on YouTube, they probably don't want you to skip cutscenes unless it's a speedrun. But thankfully, I don't really do speedruns. I just do something that's kind of in the middle of a speedrun and a let's play, or a long play, I should say, that doesn't have commentary, which most of my stuff usually doesn't, so, you know. But yeah, I usually settle for something in the middle that I call a speed play, which is probably not a very marketable term. But technically, that's what these are, because I use editing as what I use also something else, especially with these older emulator-based playthroughs. I will usually have a reference video of a speedrun right next to me, so that way I can make sure that I'm doing things as efficiently as possible. But the only difference is that I don't skip cutscenes or dialogue, and I will show off as many interesting things as possible. But I also don't want to show off every single solitary detail of a game, because I want people that watch my videos to also go out of their way and eventually experience the game for themselves most of the time. Maybe once in a while I'll want to record a objectively bad game that I wouldn't recommend people play, but for the most part, if I'm playing a game, especially if it's good enough or important enough to also get a commentary from me like this one, it is worth playing. Now, while I do recommend people play the original Sonic the Hedgehog, you don't have to beat it. Just play the first few levels, get a feel for playing 2D Sonic without a spin dash, appreciate it for what it is as the first Sonic game ever, and then just, you know, quickly dump it and move on to Sonic 2. This is absolutely a classic Mega Man situation, where the original Mega Man, solid game, maybe a little too high in the difficulty. You get to Mega Man 2 and it's literally better in every single way, okay? There are definitely other examples of that, but that just seems like one of the more notable ones to bring up. I don't see as many people outright admit that Sonic 2 is better than Sonic 1 to the degree of Mega Man 2 being better than Mega Man 1, but if you play the two games back to back, how can you not come to that conclusion? Unless, you know, nostalgia, but you can only let your own nostalgia affect your judgment so much. And I'm saying this as someone who really tends to wear their nostalgia on their sleeve sometimes, okay? So just take it from old Lasley here, that yes, nostalgia can be good, it can be intoxicating, but for the love of God, don't let it affect your judgment in the end, alright? And now that we're finally in Labyrinth Zone, holy hell, dude, okay, look, I got a bottle of water over here. Let me take a sip of this water real quick. I know this is technically a water level, so we've already got a lot of water going on, but I need to take a drink, because I've got a lot to say about this. Okay, so yes, water levels in video games have a history of being terrible on a gameplay level. Usually, aesthetically, they're pretty good, though. I'm going to specifically reference the level Aquatic Ambience from the original Donkey Kong Country. The music track for that is really great. The aesthetics are also really good for what they are. Sadly, though, water levels in a gameplay context are usually pretty bad. Mostly because of the water physics. But fans of water levels in video games might be happy to know that the water physics are not even the worst part of Labyrinth Zone in Sonic the Hedgehog, although they are a contributing factor. It's the level design. Do you see all these moving spheres? And I think in the later acts, you're going to see statues that spit out fireballs. Do you notice the close quarters? The abundance of enemies that rise from the ground, some of them you can see ahead of time and some of them you can't, spikes everywhere, enemies that throw spikes at you. Yes, I believe anyone with a working pair of eyes and a decent amount of judgment can come to the same conclusion that many other people will, that this is not very good level design. Which is another reason why you get to Sonic 2 and you realize, wow, the people that made Sonic 2, or the people that made Sonic 1, when they went into Sonic 2, when you play Sonic 2 Coming from Sonic 1, this is what you're going to think. You're going to think, wow, this development team really turned themselves around, and while this game still was a success, Sonic 2 was an even bigger success. And I think that is something we can take away, is that, yes, people joke about the Sonic series a lot. Both ironically and unironically. And quite frankly, even just looking at it from a more casual perspective, which I've been trying to do for the longest time now, since I've made certain discoveries about the fan base. Oh boy. At any rate, yes. A lot of criticism that's levied against Sega, and even in particular to their Sonic games, is usually well deserved. And I'm going to reserve a lot of this stuff for if I ever do a newer Sonic game, because, I mean, this is the first one, okay? And really, other than some spotty level design and the lack of a spin dash, this is still a solid 2D platformer. Also, I guess depending on who you ask, it could be considered a short game, but here's the thing, games that are 1 or 2 hours long, this was actually the standard back in the NES, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis era. You know, games were shorter, but the strategy that the game developers would do is that they would make the games a lot harder, so that people, particularly kids, would have to keep playing the game over and over until they eventually beat a level and get through the game, right? This was also a strategy that was employed by rental outlets like Blockbuster. Rest in peace. As a kid in the 90s, I used Blockbuster quite a bit, actually. And even into the 2000s. Fun fact, even as recent as 2010, I actually still had access to a Blockbuster. Didn't really rent a lot of stuff, but when they were clearing stuff out, I kind of made out like a bandit a little bit. But, getting off topic again, but, Sonic the Hedgehog, I don't even remember exactly what train of thought I was on, but basically, a lot of the criticisms are usually well-deserved, well-placed. Not all of them, but a lot of them, sure. One consistent complaint that I see that I actually agree with is that Sega doesn't know what to do with Sonic the Hedgehog exactly to make this the best brand it could possibly be. And, if you look back, you think, they probably knew what they were doing to an extent during the Sega Genesis era. But then you start looking at some stuff outside of the Sonic space and more into the general Sega space, and, well, Sega is a company that decided to randomly release add-ons for the Sega Genesis, and then they don't really capitalize on it by releasing a lot of compelling software. And then when they released their next major console, the Sega Saturn, by the way, even though I was alive and old enough to play video games when the Saturn released, I didn't even know what a Sega Saturn was until my teenage years, maybe even later than that. I don't think I had ever seen a Sega Saturn or even heard anybody talking about a Sega Saturn. And one of the reasons is that thing had no games. At least not a lot of games that people cared about on a large scale. And even the few games that it could have had, like Mega Man 8, Mega Man X4, a lot of other things like that, those were available on PlayStation. So, they didn't even have that advantage. And the only Sonic games that were available on Sega Saturn was a racing game spin-off that wasn't even that good as a racing game, but probably has one of the best soundtracks in the series. You could just buy the music CD and call it a day there. And Sonic Jam, which funnily enough is kind of like the prototype of the Sonic Mega Collection. Something I think a lot of people potentially watching or listening to this, myself included, have a lot of fond memories with. Sonic Mega Collection on GameCube specifically. They did release a Sonic Mega Collection Plus on the PS2 and the Xbox, but it wasn't quite the same. But yeah, so Labyrinth Zone is terrible, water levels and all that. But let's go back around because now is a pretty good time to bring up the GBA port of the original Sonic the Hedgehog. I think it's another situation where they still use the Sonic the Hedgehog name, but people call that one Sonic Genesis, even though it was on the GBA. They call it Sonic Genesis because it's a port of the original Sonic, which was originally on the Sega Genesis. They probably could have called it Sonic GBA, but I think if they did, it would confuse it with the actual Game Boy Advance Sonic games, like Sonic Advance and whatnot. That's probably why the fans, quote unquote, I don't consider myself one, but the fans call it Sonic Genesis, and I do agree with that naming convention. After thinking about it for more than a second. But, I'm not going to be able to show footage on screen, so you're going to have to take my word for it when I say this. Sonic Genesis, the GBA port of Sonic 1, well, what's something good about it is that they actually managed to add a spin dash. As a separate mode, but still, which is a good thing. The level design doesn't accommodate for it, but strangely, it doesn't break the game too much from what I've been able to see and what I've been able to glean. But, for some reason, even though I'm pretty certain the Game Boy Advance is a more powerful system than the Sega Genesis, probably not by a lot, but still, the GBA version runs unusually bad. Basically, it lags all the time. The screen crunch, by the way, screen crunch is basically when the screen is like focused down to make it seem like, I guess, make it easier for people to see on a portable screen, but not in that case. So Sonic's sprite is a lot larger and you see a lot less of the level ahead of you, which wouldn't be a problem if it was a game made from the ground up for the Game Boy Advance. That's why if you play an original Game Boy Advance 2D platformer, you usually don't deal with screen crunch all that much. Usually. But since it was a port of a Sega Genesis game, which, by the way, apparently ran in 480 by 360. I thought it was 256 by 224, but no. It's 480 by 360, or some equivalent to that. So, different aspect ratio than what Game Boy Advance games run in. I think GBA games, it's like 240 by 160, which if you upscale that times 2, is 480 by 320. So that's already kind of weird. Oh, by the way, welcome to Starlight Zone, which is a really big breath of fresh air after Labyrinth Zone, and to a lesser degree even Spring Yard Zone could be pretty chaotic too. So Starlight Zone is kind of weird because I'm not going to say it's an easy set of levels, but if you know what you're doing, maybe even by accident, you can finish all of these acts really quickly considering this is the second to last zone, which I think is pretty weird. Maybe they should have made Labyrinth Zone the second to last one. It would have made some sense there. But no. For the second to last zone, you arguably get a calm before the storm. Now, it's not to say that this is... look at all these enemies I'm running into, and all those enemies that blow themselves up. Those are a pain to deal with. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but... I don't know. I really like Starlight Zone. Like, the music track is great. The level design, it can be a little weird, but... I would say it's a... Look at this. I finished the act in 1 minute 5 seconds. When was the last time I finished an individual level in less than 2 minutes? Since, like, Marble Zone, where, like, every level was 2 minutes or more. No. Starlight Zone is a little bit longer than Green Hill, but pretty much shorter than all the other zones at this point. Which, again, it's a calm before the storm. I will say that the boss fight is probably on the harder side, just because of the gimmick involved with it, but other than that, I don't know. Why don't you guys sit back and listen to the music for a little bit while I drink some water? Let me tell you, you can never get enough of drinking water. You know, I know the human body is composed of like 70% water or some ridiculous percentage like that, but you can never get enough water. Right? I mean, soda is good too, but you gotta drink water. You can't just drink only soda or only coffee and expect to be in good shape. You're gonna have to get hydrated some way, somehow. Oh, did we just finish the second act in about the same amount of time as the first one? Yeah, I remember having to do a double take when I did that. And actually, I was expecting to have to reload a save state, and then I got to the end and I'm like, wait, what? So, I basically just finished the first 2 acts of Starlight Zone in the amount of time it took me to finish, I think, just a single act of Marble Zone. Kind of crazy how inconsistent the level lengths can be. I do think a lot of what's happening, though, is that I'm always trying my best to take the topmost path in these levels, which seems to be a general rule of thumb with Sonic the Hedgehog level design. If you take the top route, more often than not, you are taking the fastest route to get to the end of the level. But we're already on Act 3, and I will tell you, on the basis that there is a boss fight here, it's going to take you more than a minute. Also, sometimes the physics of going up, slopes, I guess you could say, or whatever, it can be a little wonky here in the original Sonic. At least in my opinion, it's a little wonky. You'll have to build up your speed a little bit to be able to effectively go up the hill sometimes. There's this random spike ball platform that does nothing but take you to a bunch of rings, which can be useful, but much like with life points in Yu-Gi-Oh!, the only ring that matters is the very last one. As long as you have one ring, every time you get hit by an enemy or a boss, as long as you recollect the ring, you'll survive. Especially if you have a shield on top of that like I do here. So, this is an interesting boss fight. You aren't able to reach Robotnik normally. You have to use the seesaws. But the good thing about this is, and this saves this from being an annoying fight, is that you can hit Robotnik's machine, or the spike bombs can do it too. And thankfully, the good doctor provides enough bombs that you're almost always going to have access to one on hand, sometimes multiple. So, but as long as you focus on getting yourself to bounce yourself up to him, and hit him a bunch of times with Sonic, yeah, if you get a couple bombs on the side, that just means you'll have to do less than your obligatory 8 hits. That is how many hits most Robotnik bosses tend to be, is 8. That is the magic number, not 3, which is usually the rule of thumb when it comes to video game boss battles. And, you know, in my personal life, I would actually say that it's usually 2. But when it comes to video game bosses, no, it's always 3. It's always stinking 3. So welcome to Scrap Brain Zone. I would say this is a pretty memorable zone. If nothing for the name, and well, the level can be pretty hard too. Like this section here with the spinning platforms, your timing with the jumps has to be obnoxiously tight to be able to stand on the platforms long enough to jump, to be able to make it up in time. And then we have disappearing and reappearing blocks. Coincidentally, this is a gimmick that was in Mega Man 2. Actually, I think it was in the original Mega Man as well. Yeah, it seems to be a bit of a crossover there between Mega Man and Sonic. Coincidentally, both are characters that prominently prominently feature the color blue. But there really isn't going to be much left of Sonic the Hedgehog, so at the end of the day, what do I personally think about the original Sonic the Hedgehog? Do I think it's a classic? Yes, absolutely. I mean, it is the first one. Even if, objectively speaking, Sonic 2 is better than this game in every single way that you can imagine. I can't think of, even trying to think about it debatably, I can't think of any way that Sonic 2 could be considered inferior to Sonic 1. And without it being just somebody's nostalgia, and if it is somebody's nostalgia, it would have to be someone's nostalgia, someone who played this game when it was new, and they're probably old by now. They're probably smart enough to know not to let nostalgia affect their judgment. So, I guess I'll just say GG to Sonic 1, but this is still a classic game. And I do think this is, if you want to get into the Sonic series really, like you really want to get into it and see the best that this series has to offer, you either start here or you start with the original Sonic Adventure. Although I do think you still should play this game right here, the original Sonic. Again, it's probably a bit of a tall order to ask you to finish this game because it can be a little rough. And I would say it's 50-50 on it being the game's level design fault or the player's fault. I mean, if you notice, I don't think I lost a life. I don't think I gained a life. But I think I gained some continues from some of the special stages. I don't know. Here though, the first act of Scrap Brain, you're outside of the facility, and the second act, you're inside the facility. Which makes you wonder what the third act could be. Oh, you don't want to know. But you'll find out soon enough, and as I found out in this playthrough here, it can be cheesed a little bit, thankfully. But yeah, Scrap Brain Zone, it's pretty tough. I would say it's the toughest zone in the game, but it's the toughest zone in the game without the water physics. For now. Anyway, oh boy, you are not gonna like, if you hated Labyrinth Zone, you're gonna hate Act 3 of Scrap Brain Zone. But I will say, on the other hand, the final boss is pretty solid. It's very slow. It's very solid. Definitely not the best final boss in the Sonic series, let alone the classic trilogy over here. So, yeah. Oh, and those caterpillar enemies, let me tell you, they can really be annoying. Like, they look inconspicuous because of how slow they move. But here's the thing. I think even when you're in your ball form, anything that isn't their head will damage you and cause you to lose ranks. So, what you want to do, since you don't have a spin dash, a common strat, is if you're running into an enemy, push down on the control pad, D-pad or whatever, and roll into a ball right before you make contact with them. You'd be surprised how much of a common method that is when you play a 2D Sonic game without a spin dash. It's funny because in the 3D Sonic games, a lot of the later ones anyway, I find that you usually don't really have to worry about spin dashing as much. At least in my experience anyway. Usually it's made up for in other ways, I guess you could say. So, yeah, you know. But you get the invincibility, and when you get the invincibility, it changes the music to be like the main theme of the game, which I think is pretty interesting. And I think they remixed the theme as the theme song for Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog. But then they also throw in a rhythm that's like, which I can't put my finger on what classic song motif that's from. But whatever it is, it's insanely catchy, let me tell you. We're not done with the game yet, even though you'll notice there's only like 3 minutes of this video left. Scrap Brain Zone Act 3. It's Labyrinth Zone, but gray. And while it has the potential to be just as bad, if not worse, you can actually finish this in under a minute. If you're careful, which I know is a lot to ask. because you're seeing this right now. And yes, I struggled with this a good bit. But as long as you follow the golden rule of 2D Sonic, stay on the topmost path as much as you possibly can. God, those drill enemies can really get you if you're not careful. If you follow that golden rule, you will find, by the way, these rotating spike balls are the worst. Come to this bunch of springs and, you're at the end! Final zone! Hooray! But that can be bad, especially if you find yourself under the water for too long. I think that level might be the reason why my old playthrough of this was 1 hour and 10 minutes. Like, what? Yeah, I beat my old record by like 15 minutes. It's kind of crazy, isn't it? But anyway, final boss. Final fight with Robotnik over here. This fight isn't really that hard, but you get no rings coming into this. I don't know if the rings carried over from Act 3. I doubt it. But you're going to find that that's actually kind of a common thing with final bosses in these classic Sonic games. You're going to have 0 rings. And he's still 8 hits. But it's not that this fight is difficult. It's just really slow. You have to wait for the energy ball attack, which is deceptively easy to dodge. Just stand in one spot, the spot that has the largest gap between the energy balls. In some cases, it's a little harder to discern than others, but still fairly easy to figure out. You know, not really a big deal. But in this part right here, it's pretty obvious. Yeah. Just jump into Eggman 8 times and go. The pattern of the pistons is random. Don't worry about that too much. And yeah, hope you guys enjoyed my little commentary for the original Sonic the Hedgehog. See you next time if I decide to do a commentary for another Sonic game. I'm gonna say it's impossible, but you know, at least I did the original Sonic and enjoyed the ending, which I think is different. Oh yeah, this is your Chaos Emerald ending. Okay, that was worth the trouble. I wish I could have gotten Super Sonic, but I guess I'll take it. Nice art.